Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and I thought I'd open on this loading screen because today we are talking about cybernetics and robotics. So, the loading screen just happened to give me a robobrain, so that's one of the things we're going to be talking about today as a way of keeping someone alive forever, essentially. So, this is one of the kind of common methods that we see is using cybernetics of some kind to create a cyborg, to create a robot with a human brain, that kind of a thing. And we do see it quite a bit throughout the kind of Fallout universe. So I thought we would come here, which is a Mehcanist's Lair. So obviously part of the Automatron DLC is this location, which does become like a settlement. Because this is where robobrains were first kind of made, and it was housed in a secret facility underneath the Robco sales centre. So yeah, very interesting. You know, what they've done is taken a human brain and installed it in a robot, essentially, to use the human brain as the CPU, basically the central processing unit, which I think is very interesting. Got forfeiture, I don't know what that means. Research labs and holding block A. So you can kind of see here, you've even got these like brain powered gurneys and these prison cells. So this is what they did when they were developing the robobrains, was they used prisoners, basically people that had been convicted of crimes, and they just took their brains and put them into into robots. So yeah, but it's an interesting one. There's also quite a few other things like the brains in Old World Blues, the cyberdogs, the synths, and Mr. House himself, of course, which, you know, is a big one. So yeah, this is where the robobrains were invented, really. They were created by General Atomics alongside the US Army, and there was also some input and support from Robco, which is obviously Mr. House's company. And as we know from Fallout New Vegas, he potentially had, you know, a good reason to want to kind of get involved with this kind of technology for preserving things. So this is the kind of jars where they're keeping the brains and extracting the brains and things like that. So the robobrains are pretty effective, and they were hopefully going to be more effective than other robots, because instead of having any kind of artificial intelligence on board, you would have the capacity and intelligence that the human brain could provide in a way that couldn't be provided by anything else, which is an interesting one. And it was a secret project, so when you come into here during this DLC, Automatron DLC, you do learn quite a bit about the creation of the robobrains, what happened, and kind of what went wrong to a degree as well. There are some interesting terminal entries that you can read. So, brain extraction terminal. So from these things, you can learn quite a lot about the people that were involved in this. So this facility is hidden under the Robco Sales and Service Centre near the airport in Boston, and obviously the prisoners were used as brain donors for the robobrains. The memories were supposed to be wiped, and then the brains installed into the robotic chassis. And you can learn quite a bit about the kind of people that were working here, and their attitude towards the people that they were extracting brains from. So they really treated these people with no empathy and a lot of contempt. But yeah, I said the equipment failures are getting backed up. And then, you know, the spinal cord not fully severed and the brain's pulled out too early. So they're having some technical issues. Yeah, so they're experimenting with the biogel. So the brains are obviously kept in a gel to preserve them, which is something that we'll talk about a bit more later on. But they decided to mess around with it, and they've mixed some of it with some grenadine, which is a sweet red syrup. I can't remember what flavour it's supposed to be, but it's added to a lot of cocktails, and vodka, and turned out to be really good. So they've invented a new drink using this biogel, which they're calling Extractor Sunrise. So, you know, they just think, oh, this is fun, but it's too expensive because the biogel is really expensive. You know, like that. Fair enough, you want to kind of have fun at your work, but there's a line that probably shouldn't be crossed, and this is the entry that I've got in mind. So, they mess around with a colleague giving him a brain-shaped cake, which was actually an extracted brain, which he then ate. Obviously a hilarious prank according to these people. But prion diseases like CJD and bovine spongiform encephalopathy have something to say about this, because, you know, potentially problematic, and the fact that they thought this was hilarious to give this guy a brain and let him eat it before telling him that it's not actually a cake, because interestingly the brain does have the consistency of what we would call jelly in the UK, but in the States you would call jello. You know, that kind of texture. That's kind of what the brain feels like. So, you know, yeah. So lots of questions about why they're doing this and why they think it's funny. So obviously these researchers don't really give much of a care about the fact that they're taking all these people and taking their brains out and things to do research and experiment to make these robots. And, you know, then somebody's kind of expressing I don't really feel good about this, guys. And they, yeah, so this person is just like, yeah, it doesn't really bother me. I don't understand why people are kind of bothered about it, but, you know, you're literally killing people, because you're wiping the memories from the brains, which means that you're stripping away any kind of identity or, you know, free will from these people, and reprogramming them essentially. So the brain's getting used as a central processing unit, which is fine, but they're taking away anything that would make that person an actual person. So, you know, there's no memories, there's no personality left. And then the kind of main plot of the Automatron DLC is an interesting one, because there's problems with the robobrains and their interpretation of commands and instructions. So when it comes to actual like robots or AI algorithms and computer systems in any way, what happens basically, I mean, this is really oversimplifying it, but, you know, you input a list of instructions and then the machine carries out those instructions, but they just do what they're told. There's no interpretation, there's no, you know, it's just, okay, if X then do Y, if this happens do that, and the machine can't deviate from those instructions. But as soon as you put something organic into it, something like the human brain, which has much higher capacity than any computer, but also has things like reasoning and, you know, the way our brain works, the way we think about things. So you're introducing a bit of a wild card in that sense, because then, you know, these brains are interpreting the instructions. They're not blindly following them. They're like, okay, well, you know, and what happens is that the robobrains that the Mechanist was sending out to save people had then concluded that the best way to save humanity from suffering anymore is just to eliminate them all, to euthanize people. So, you know, there's that. So it's clearly a problem, and it is something that, you know, the people here, the researchers here, were kind of running into issues with that the robobrains weren't cooperative, that they were, you know, some of them were freaking out once they were activated. it became a real problem. There is terminal entries somewhere to that effect. I can't remember exactly where. So, of course, we know that not all the robobrains actually had memory wipes. There were some that were allowed to kind of keep their memories and their identities because, you know, while the human mind is a bit more of an abstract concept, but it is inherently part of the brain. And, that, you know, you've got this question of, I know somebody actually tried to do it in real life, but it's kind of more of a theoretical thought experiment of if you do a brain transplant or a head transplant, when you put the new brain into the person's body, who is that person? Are they the person whose brain it is, or are they the person whose body it is? And it's something that has been hotly debated, and I think it's quite an interesting thing to think about, is that, you know, if you take, like, my brain and put it in someone else's body, does that body then become me because it's got my brain, my memories, my thoughts, my feelings, just in a different body? So who, you know, who's that person? What's their identity? Where does that identity come from? How much of our identity is related to our physical body, and how much of our identity is related to our minds and our beliefs and thoughts and feelings? So it's kind of an interesting question, really, if kind of creepy and uncomfortable to think about as well. So yeah, I would definitely love to hear any thoughts on that, what you believe makes the most sense for that kind of question. And then, you know, so if you go to Fallout 4's Far Harbour DLC, there's Vault 118, which is underneath the fancy hotel on the island, and the people that were there basically had their brains put into robobrains so that they could live forever. It's a fun little quest with the murder mystery and all the rest of it. I have covered that. I'll put a wee link to the Vault 118 video in the description if you want to check that out if you've not seen it and you've not been there. So these people were allowed to preserve who they were. They didn't have a memory wipe, and it's quite an interesting one. And then another group of brains who were transported into slightly different machines. They weren't the kind of robots, the robo-brains like that. They were transported into, they were transplanted into something else. So we're going to head over towards the Mojave, to the west coast, and we're going to pay a visit to the brains of the think tank. So bear with me and I will meet you over there. Welcome back. So, yep, we are back here in Old World Blues in the think tank to talk about these guys. So, these are obviously where the scientists, along with Dr. Mobius, who's at the Forbidden Zone Dome. And they are, in essence, a kind of specialised robo-brain. So you can see this Dr. Klein, who's kind of the boss guy, and he's got his brain bubbling away in its biogel. Then he's got screens to be his eyes and mouth, and yeah, so somewhere in between a robo-brain and a Mr. Handy, I guess, is the best way to describe it. So this DLC is obviously all about mad science. Your brain gets removed at the beginning and gets replaced with advanced technology, as well as your heart and your spine. And you can even have a conversation with your own brain in this DLC, which is, you know, an interesting one, especially given that your brain sounds a lot like Stewie Griffin in this DLC. And the brain is placed in a jar with kind of biogel as well. So you can see Dr. 8, again, he's got his biogel, and there's bubbles, so presumably there is oxygen getting pumped in to the biogel to keep the brain oxygenated and keep it happy, as well as nutrients and whatnot. So they were obviously kind of involved to some degree in the secret project with the US Army about the robo-brains, because they are essentially kind of more specialised type of robo-brain. They obviously decided at some point to do this so that they could continue their science after the bombs fell and basically forever. But they all have been driven a bit mad by this. If you
come for hello? Oh, I'll give you a hello.
Yeah.
A hello unsurpassed in all creation.
Thanks, Dr. Boris. So, yeah, you can talk to all these guys, and they're all a wee bit on the eccentric side, I guess. Whether they were like that before, we don't really know, but it does kind of suggest that the brains are starting to potentially degrade a little bit despite the biogel keeping all the function there. They've kind of forgotten what it's like to be human. They've forgotten what it's like to have, they've forgotten about things like fingers and toes and, breathing, as well as some of the things that have happened. And we can kind of learn quite a bit about the people that were these, that housed these brains when they were still human, and even help them remember some of the things that they liked about being human. But their kind of lack of care for damage in the environment around them and their test subjects means that you do have to keep them confined here and not let them escape, where they can actually harm other people. So again, this method of living forever by putting your brain into a robot, it's not perfect. There's a limit to how much data the human brain can store. Just like a computer, your hard drive only has so much capacity, so if you need to add more, you have to remove something or transfer it to a different storage device or something. But it's not so easy to do that with brains. Writing things down, taking photographs, that's one of the ways that we do keep memories of experiences and things, is taking photographs, which is something that we do a lot now that, pretty much all of us have got pretty decent cameras in our pockets. Taking videos, writing things down in a journal, all that kind of stuff, because there is only so much capacity that your brain has, and eventually you're going to hit a limit where your brain just can't fit any more information in, or once your hard drive's full, you need to delete some stuff, and your brain kind of works that way. But you could have kind of a skewed idea of what's okay to delete though, or you could accidentally delete the wrong thing and forget something important. We know that's how the human brain works, so we can't really remember much from our early life. It's generally, I'm 38 this year and I struggled to remember much before I started school, to be honest, because it was such a long time ago. All these early experiences when you're really young, unless there's something particularly memorable, good or bad, a lot of that stuff gets forgotten, because your brain's just like, yeah, we don't really need this anymore. I think that the way that was demonstrated in the film Inside Out was actually quite a good way of kind of indicating that. And mundane information isn't retained either. So, your brain kind of filters all the sensory input, filters everything, which is why unless you deliberately try and look at your own nose, you don't see it, because your brain's just like, yeah, your nose is there, that's fine, we don't care about that, so your brain ignores it. And the same goes for memories, is that the brain will kind of keep what it deems as important, which is why when it comes to studying, so if you want to learn something and remember something, then that's why you're advised by teachers and lecturers to go over it again and again, because repetition makes it more memorable and helps you create these memories so that you can then refer back to that information when you need it. And same for practicing skills and things, then your nervous system and your brain has to kind of learn as you repeat and you practice, and then you get better at things. It's also why we really don't learn, we don't remember what it was like when we were still in the womb and all that kind of stuff. Important things that are retained because we do recall them regularly, so that neural pathway gets reinforced. Kind of like how, if there's a path and then there's a patch of grass, but instead of walking round the corner on the path, people walk across the grass, and the more people that do that, and then eventually the grass becomes a path because people keep walking that way. And it's just every time somebody else walks across it, it's reinforcing this like shortcut path. So that's kind of how things like that work in your brain as well, which is really, really interesting. And unfortunately, the same thing happens with traumatic experiences. So the harm that they cause is retained by the brain. Your brain hangs on to these things because it's about anticipating potential danger. So It's a survival mechanic so that we can avoid the thing that caused us harm by being hyper aware of it, but it also means that these flashbacks can happen, which is the kind of essence of someone having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because the brain keeps going over and going over what happened and bringing it back, which obviously has a major impact on the person's mental health. Other times, other cases, really traumatic events, especially ones that happen early in life, are blocked out by the brain to protect the mind from reliving it. So it means that, you know, the person who has suffered this trauma has blocked it from their memory, so it means that they can't really recall the details of what happened, and it's because the brain is trying to protect it. And one of the things, you know, trauma, sometimes it is mental trauma, but sometimes it can be, you know, sort of related to physical trauma as well. So the body does retain damage from physical trauma. So taking the brain out of the body is something that's traumatic to the body, and it probably does have an impact on the function, same as the ones that are put into these robobrains and these robots without having a memory wipe. It could affect their grip on reality, which we kind of see to a degree with the brains here and Dr. Mobius as well. So is living forever like that really worth the risk of having horrendous mental health problems? I'm not sure that it is, to be honest. And then we've got another one. It's not strictly a brain, but it's kind of a similar thing, which would be what happened to John-Caleb Bradberton. So we're going to go back over to the East Coast and we're going to pay a visit to Nuka-World. So bear with me and we'll head over there. Okay, welcome back. We're back here in Nuka-World, so I've just done a little bit of sneaky magic to get to this point, because turns out I don't actually have a save file where Cappy in a Haystack's actually been completed. So I've just kind of sorted that out to get to Bradberton's office. With Sierra here, who we have talked about before. So we need to kind of get into, as in the real world, we do know that some people, wealthy people, wanted to kind of ensure that they had a way of living forever, and the same thing happened in the Fallout universe with the spectre of nuclear war on the horizon. Some of these people made preparations, Mr. House being one of the kind of most well-known and significant ones in the Mojave Wasteland, but others have done it with perhaps less success. So John-Caleb Bradberton, who was the inventor of Nuka-Cola and CEO of Nuka-Cola Corporation, is one of those men. So he was approached by General Braxton to allow his organic chemists, beverageers, to work on chemical weapons technology. He agreed as long as he was allowed into what was called the Leap X program, which is a project intending to use specialised machines to extend life. So some of these things. So Vault-Tec were kind of involved in this as well, which is why they were given a kind of exhibition. You're knocking things over, Sierra. So let's press the hidden button here. There's Bottle and Cappy. And Secret Elevator. Yes, right. Are you coming? Okay, she'll teleport to me anyway, it's fine. So yeah, unfortunately for Mr. Bradberton, the project was actually unable to accommodate an entire human body and only approximately, I think, 10 pounds of organic matter. So we shall see in a minute. So he had his own personal little vault constructed to protect his himself. So if we head in here, and it's all very nicely decorated, big fancy car, yep. So here he is. Yep, so he was left as a head in a jar attached to all these machines, and unfortunately after the bombs fell and he was left in this secret vault alone, trapped and unable to do anything, yep, is alive. So he's not able to do anything about the situation that he's in, unfortunately. So it's only when you come here, talk to Sierra, do the Cappy contest and find your way in here that you discover John-Caleb Bradberton. And when you talk to him, he is like, oh my god, people, because he hasn't seen people in 200 years. And when you discuss things, mention hidden Cappy contest.
Cappy contest. It all seems so long ago. Another lifetime. That was before I became this monster. Before I was trapped here for centuries to suffer in solitude. This was General Braxton's plan all along. Damn the man. He called it Project Cobalt. In exchange for my weapon design, he would give me access to life-extending technology. I'm such a fool for taking him at his word. He never told me that this would be the price.
Yep, so he's kind of summarised that fairly well, is that, you know, he has been left here all alone with nobody to speak to, and he is a head in a jar, so he can't move, he can't influence anything, he can't affect anything, so he can't do anything about his own situation, which is a bit different from obviously what Mr. House has done, which we will talk about next week, because Mr. House at least is capable of affecting his network and his robots and things and making giving commands and things, whereas unfortunately Mr. Bradberton here is really not able to do that. So yeah, very sorry.
I can imagine what you must have gone through. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Bradberton.
A weapon? I don't believe it.
Genius is restless, madam. It must expand, seek new challenges, and explore new frontiers. So yes, a weapon. It was going to be a quantum-enhanced variant of the standard portable tactical. In fact...
What?
So yeah, he's basically like, yep, I'd agreed to do this research to create new weapons for the US Army, and then they put me in this jar. So yeah, it can kind of... And then he says, I want to die, because... Yeah, so he asks you to kill him, and Sierra's not happy, but he's obviously not had a good time for the last couple of centuries, stuck in this one room with nobody to talk to, nothing to do, you know, and...
I realize that what I'm asking isn't easy.
Yeah.
When the power is cut, the door to the prototype storage room will open automatically.
Yeah. He's just like, I don't care anymore, and then she's like, I'll stay with him and keep him company.
If he lives,
and you can just, yeah.
I've got a limited edition.
Yeah.
One of my most...
Nuka-Cola.
I sort of feel sorry for him.
Yeah, so now you have a choice to make about, do we kill John-Caleb Bradberton, or do we let Sierra have her way and she can stay and keep him company? It's an interesting kind of conversation, and it's obviously another conversation about the ethics of kind of euthanasia and helping someone who wants to die to do so when the person that wants to die is in a position where they can't do it by themselves. And it is something that we do see come up again and again, because it's a very emotive issue, and a lot of people do have very differing opinions on it. It is something that's actually quite topical. The Scottish Government have been like talking about kind of assisted dying and whether to make that something available to people. And obviously my experience as a vet, as you guys know, I worked as a vet for 15 years, so I have carried out probably several hundred euthanasias over the years, certainly quite a lot, so I'm quite used to kind of having these conversations. And obviously animals and people are different in some ways, but you know, an animal can't suffer once it's passed, a person can't suffer once they've passed. So you know, but he's obviously had a miserable existence here, with you know, nobody to talk to, no human contact, absolutely nothing. So what do you think? Do you think this is a life worth living for this man, being a head in a jar that can't
Like that for centuries.
exactly, Sarah? You know, is that something that's worth living? And even the most introverted person is going to run out of things to think about or do. You've no body, you can't move, you can't feel anything, you can't do anything. It doesn't sound like fun. And I am not someone that like sitting with nothing to do, which is why I play games, why I do a lot of crafts, why I write books, all these things. I'm not someone that can sit idle. I have to be doing something pretty much all the time. Even watching TV shows, I don't just watch a TV show, I'm always doing something else at the same time, just because that's the way my brain works, and a lot of people are the same. And even if you are a really introverted person, there's only so long that you can go without human contact, without cracking up. During lockdown, for me, because I lived alone, the only people that I really had any contact with was my colleagues at work, which was a lot less because of, you know, the situation that was happening in 2020, and talking to clients on the phone most of the time, and occasionally seeing them and their animals in person when necessary. But we were told to only see animals in person if we really had to. We were allowed to prescribe remotely. So a lot of kind of consultations was done over kind of video chat over the phone, with them sending pictures to us and that kind of a thing. And I think if I had been furloughed from work, I don't know what would have happened, because at least, you know, working a few days, I mean, I was working 4 days a week, so at least I had some kind of human contact, because even being a very introverted person, there's only so much you can take before you do have to, you know, go out and actually be around other people and have someone to talk to. And, you know, in this situation, my brain can do a lot of fun things. I like writing stories, I do like writing books, but you can't even do that because all you can do is think about things in your head, but you can't, you know, you can't do anything about it. And I think this would just be horrendous. And one of the things, you know, certainly from the point of view of euthanasia, that when we're talking about that in animals, we're talking about weighing up quality of life versus quantity of life. So a longer life with suffering versus a shorter life and less suffering. So having a prolonged life like this, when you have no quality of life, just doesn't seem worth it. I think, I mean, maybe other people probably feel differently, and that's the thing about this. It's not a, you know, straight answer that it's either absolutely right or absolutely wrong. There's shades of grey in the argument, and people that have different opinions on these things. So I'd love to know what you guys think about that kind of thing, and if you think, you know, would you want to exist forever like this, or would you think it was just absolute torture? Certainly for me, whenever I do this quest, which apparently I haven't done on this, on the PC version, but I think I've done it a couple of times on the PS4 version of the game, that I usually switch off the machine for Mr. Bradberton, because I can't imagine sitting like this for 200 years with nothing to do. Nobody really knew he was there except for Peyton, who presumably died at some point, either when the bombs fell or after the bombs fell. But living forever, you would anticipate being able to do something with that extended lifetime. You know, you could learn an instrument, you could cure cancer, rewrite the entire works of Shakespeare in 6 languages. Something. You would do something. If you were immortal, you would want to actually do something with all that extra time, not just sitting as a head in a jar that you can't move or influence anything or have any kind of effect. And for me, certainly, that just sounds awful. So I definitely empathise with his position, and think that the kindest thing that you can do is to switch off his life support and let him die, so that he's not suffering in this situation. I mean, Sierra means well, but even if you do side with Bradberton, she does kind of accept, she's upset, but she does kind of accept that it was probably the right thing to do. We've got a wee bit of a glitchy Nuka-Cola bottles over there. What's going on, guys?
Don't rush your decision.
Yeah, so it's one of these things where, you know, we're talking about preserving the human brain, and while, you know, for John, Caleb here, his brain's still there inside his head, whereas the robobrains and the think tank, the brain's being kind of extracted and put into the thing. But either way, one of the important things about when you have technology meeting physiology is that in order for the human brain to function, it needs a constant supply of glucose. So other organs and muscles can use amino acids and fats to create energy. The brain can't really do this, at least not very well, which is why if someone has hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, it can progress to neurological symptoms like seizures and coma, because the brain needs that to function. The brain also needs a consistent supply of oxygen. The brain uses up 20% of your body's oxygen intake. So if you're going to put a brain in a jar or put the head in the jar, there has to be a way of supplying glucose, supplying oxygen, water, and all the other kind of metabolites and things that the brain needs and would normally get from the bloodstream in order to function, as well as a way of removing metabolic waste products like carbon dioxide and lactic acid. So this biogel has to be able to provide all that. The machinery has to be able to pump oxygen in there and a source of glucose. Because all the electricity in the world isn't going to make up for a lack of oxygen and glucose if you're going to use an organic CPU like the human brain. So you have to merge technology and physiology for it to work well, because the human brain is really complex, and even the top neuroscientists don't know everything about how the brain works. We just don't understand quite a lot of it. The knowledge is improving all the time now that we've got things like functional MRI scans and things. We're learning, but it's a very, very complex organ, and we don't understand every detail as of yet. But one thing we do know is that the brain does degrade very quickly once it's removed from oxygen supply and metabolites. So the figure that's usually thrown around is 4 minutes without oxygen, and that's the point where the brain starts to die and starts to lose function. So that's why CPR is such an important thing if you want someone who's suffered a cardiac arrest to actually have a chance of recovering. You need to keep the blood pumping, you need to keep the oxygen moving, because the brain needs to get that oxygen, or if the person survives, they could end up suffering brain damage if they go too long without getting oxygen to the brain, and that time is very short. It's only 4 or 5 minutes. So even with all of that, and even with the biogel that we have, the brains are degrading. We see this in the brains of Old World Blues. They're all, they've all gone a wee bit kind of crazy, almost like there's some form of, I don't know if it was like dementia, but there certainly seems to be some degradation of the brain function for the brains. You've forgotten a lot of things about being human. There's a lot of, stuff going on there. And even, Rex, the cyberdog companion in Fallout New Vegas, he is suffering from neural degradation and needs a brain transplant. So it's probably not a perfect long-term solution to living forever. And also, does that mean that Rex is still Rex? So that's certainly an interesting topic when it comes to this as well, is that if you put a brain in a robot, is that robot then that person, even though their body potentially still exists, but because you've moved the brain, have you just basically moved the person? It's an interesting debate, and I would love to hear your thoughts on all of that stuff, how you think that would work and how that would apply, because a lot of what makes us who we are comes from our brains. It comes from our experiences, it comes from our thoughts, it comes from our opinions and beliefs, and that's where a lot of our identity comes from. I don't want to get into too much kind of political stuff, but there's obviously a lot of conversations about these and about things like gender identity and that kind of thing, and people going on about basic biology, even though biology doesn't do hard and fast rules. Biology is very complicated, and it's that, a lot of that is that, how much, it's the nature versus nurture thing. It's, how many of these traits are inherent to us that, and it's to do with our physical body and our physiology, versus how much of our identity is shaped by the experiences we've had in life and by, the way we've grown up and things like that, and what we've learned early in life. So, it's when it comes to someone's identity, it's never simple, and it's never that's the reason that you can have identical twins. You do see this identical twins that are genetically identical as well. That's kind of the gist, is that they basically have the exact same DNA or near enough, but they can grow up to be very different people. Personality can be different and things. So it really does prove that, it's not all down to physiology and down to our genetics and things, that our identity is in part something that comes from our minds and comes from our brains, using memories and experiences and things. So I think it's quite an interesting topic, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, and obviously keep it respectful, though I know touched a wee bit on politics, but I don't really want to get too much into that, because it's not that relevant to this topic. But keep things respectful. The comments will be moderated if anybody starts getting nasty, but it's an interesting thing, and I think, if you had the option and you were deciding in which method you would want to live forever, is this what you would want? Would you want to be a robobrain? Would you want to be a head in a jar? Or would you rather keep your physical body, keep your brain in your body, and live forever in a different method? I think that'd be an interesting question to answer. And certainly it is a decision that, it is a question that you do have to answer in the game in a couple of situations. Another one that kind of comes to mind is Harold the tree. So he's obviously a character that showed up in the earlier Fallout games as a ghoul with the tree growing out of his head, but by the time Fallout 3 comes around, he's rooted to the spot and he is really uncomfortable. He wants to die, but he can't do anything about it because he's rooted to the spot. So he has to wait for somebody that's going to listen to him to come along and actually help him out in that situation. So it's definitely an interesting one, but I know it can be a bit of a divisive issue, so let's just keep things respectful if you want to talk about it. But I do love to kind of chat about these things with people, so let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll pick things up next week. So next week's going to be all about Mr. House. So Tuesday we'll do his biography, so about who he is as a person, and then next Saturday we will talk about what he's done to ensure that he lives forever and how that might work. So hopefully you'll be looking forward to that. I think it's going to be an interesting one, because I think Mr. House is a really, really interesting character. There's a lot about him that I think is fascinating, and I'm looking forward to getting into that. So hopefully you'll come back for that, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.